Good afternoon, and we are coming to you live from the National Museum of Singapore for this special program titled Finding My Way Home During a Pandemic, held in conjunction with the museum's special exhibition Picturing the Pandemic, a visual record of COVID-19 in Singapore, which will run till 17th of October 2021. Today we have award-winning photographer Hwee Young, who was one of the 5 local photographers that were commissioned by the National Museum to document Singapore's COVID-19 experience. Their photographs and films can be seen in the museum's special exhibition, Picturing the Pandemic. But first, a little more about Hwee Young. So she started her career as a photojournalist with the Straits Times in 2001. In 2004, she joined the European Press Photo Agency, also known as EPA, to cover stories in Singapore and Southeast Asia. In her diverse career, she has covered stories such as the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, a global financial crisis, as well as the Formula One Grand Prix. In 2019, she returned to Singapore to focus on managing EPA's Asia coverage as Regional Chief for Asia Pacific, covering East Asia and Southeast Asia. In today's program, Hwee Young will be sharing a bit more of her experience living and working overseas, as well as how she rediscovered Singapore. When she came back to Singapore and when she was covering last year's circuit breaker for the museum's Picturing the Pandemic project. If you have any questions for Hwee Young, please do submit them online by clicking on the link or scanning the QR code to access our Pigeonhole link too. We will try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. Now I'll pass the time over to Hwee Young. So Hwee Young, please.
Thank you very much, Fabian. It is an honor and a privilege to be here at the National Museum. Thank you for inviting me here. And thank you for this collaboration with the National Museum on Picturing the Pandemic exhibition. Just a bit about myself. I've been a photojournalist for almost 20 years, and a large part of that was spent overseas, based in China, Beijing. So, and just coming back to Singapore is a very interesting period for me, and I'm just going to share my journey with you. Sorry. My first foray to Beijing as a photojournalist was to cover the Beijing 2008 Olympics. And at that time, it was, that was almost quite a decade, more than a decade ago, and the China then was very different, and I was absolutely fascinated with the country, with the people, the young athletes who were competing in the Olympics, and I have been doing gymnastics for most of the Olympics. I have done 3 Olympics so far, with Beijing, Rio, and most recently Tokyo, and this has just been an amazing experience for me. So, but I was also very interested in finding out the country develops, and I took every opportunity to try to move to Beijing, to China, to see how it is. So in 2010 to 2019, I moved to Beijing, relocated to join the bureau in EPA. In China to cover China and also North Korea and Mongolia over the years. So this is a picture, as you can see, this is Land of Mao. This is a picture I took of him behind the ice, behind a soldier at Tiananmen Square. And this has been kind of my way of seeing, a picture that says my way of seeing China for a while, and how China is also viewing its people. So just one of the first stories that I documented when I first arrived in China was on the Nanshui Beidiao South-North Water Transfer Project. Now, this is one of the biggest, largest water diversion project in China. It was conceived in 1952 to solve the country's chronic water shortages, and involves creating 3 routes to channel 44.8 billion cubic meters of water from southern China to the northern areas. So as part of the project central route affecting Henan and Hubei provinces, water from the Tanjungkou Reservoir will be diverted to Beijing. And because of this, part of Sichuan County, a remote mountainous region, will be completely submerged by the water from the Tanjungkou Reservoir. And 162,000 migrants would have to be relocated because of this project. So I set out to document this resettlement of these villages. And this picture was taken in Changfang village on the morning of the relocation, where the villagers were gathering in the village to move to a village, to move to another area 500 km away. And this was a very emotional time for these villagers, because they were basically going to be separated from their friends and family in their home, in their old home, and to move to another completely different area. And they have to actually take a bus and cross the river to do that. And it was a very emotional one. There was some a farewell party kind of for them, with musicians on the road, but it was really heartbreaking actually to see how some of these villagers have to separate from their families. And I followed them on their journey across with the bus, and across the Tanjung Ko Reservoir on a ferry barge, and then further on to the Hwee County, where their new home is, and where the government basically provided them new homes that are, well, some stocked with new appliances for them. And I felt that this was this story actually made me feel a bit more about how the concept of home for a lot of people. And I wanted to keep documenting them and find out how they have resettled in their new homes. So 3 years later, I went back to photograph these villagers and to see how they have settled into their new homes. So, well, this is in 2003, and then 2013. Sorry, the project has had its share of controversies, where pollution and worries of excessive drainage of water from the Yangtze River has created deep environmental concerns. And local officials are still working on environmental protection measures as they try to prepare to divert the water from the Han River to raise the level of the Tanjung Ko Reservoir. So, while some of the resettled migrants have embraced their new homes, others complain of shoddy housing and amenities, dry, barren farmland, and inadequate compensation. But my focus was more on how these migrants have actually settled and made their new home their own. And so I decided to take a series of portraits of these families in their homes, and they shared with me, for example, what they brought from their old home to their new home. For example, this family from the top left with Zhu Zisheng and his wife and son and daughter, they were taking in a photo of an old bed where they brought all the way from their old home in Changfang to this village. And further down, there's the family with the old tractor from their home, and a family with also their motorcycle, and then also also other villagers who are embracing their homes with this new love for cross stitch and what they brought into their home as well. So these are just a series of portraits that I did on these migrants at that time. And it was during this time that I really felt that home was a very important subject to a lot of people. And now moving on, just to share other stories that I did as well in China. One of the big topics was on the environment. And one particular story that struck me was on the cancer villages due to heavy pollution. As you know, in the early stages of China, there were a lot of industrial development, and this has been done at the expense of the environment, basically. So this is a picture of dried meats hung by villagers outside the Jinghuarun chemical industry plant at an industrial park in Zekou town, Tianjiang city of Hubei province. This is in 2013. So while we have been we have a lot of heavy smog in Beijing and stuff, but this was nothing. This was nothing compared to what's happening to these villagers in Zekou town. basically they have noise pollution, air pollution, water pollution on a daily basis over the past 2 years. And this has caused a lot of the villagers to develop cancer. And Xinhua News actually reported that there were more than 60 cancer deaths in various villages of Zhekou town, which has been caused by the heavy pollution. So, um, and there were many villagers complaining of intensifying respiratory, heart, skin, and circulatory illnesses caused by the pollution, and there was a large spike in cancer diagnosis and deaths due to these factories. And so I went to this village and talked to a lot of these villagers who basically were feeling very helpless. They invited me to their home, some of them, to show me how the pollution has affected their farmland. They showed me their CT scans of of what the doctor of their medical examinations, and also they have to send their children away. Basically, this was a portrait of a young boy who has to leave the home because the parents believe that they cannot have a healthy life here in the town, in the village. And also there were many deaths happening in the village as well due to this toxic pollution. So that was one of the, sorry, let me go back again. So this is one of the story that I did, and that really struck me in China during this time. And that was why this picture here struck me as extremely uncommon, and why it speaks to a lot of people, because you can hardly see blue skies in Beijing, in a lot of these places at that time. And just going back to how that really struck me as a person, was how lucky I was, and how we in Singapore, that we did not have all these issues, and that we did not really have to endure what these villages in Zhekou town had to go through, and how important it is, especially with all the climate change issues coming on, that we make sure that the environment are protected. So besides these environmental stories, the other stories, of course, was in documenting the development of China politically, economically, and social changes. So being well-registered photojournalist with a major foreign wide agencies, I had the privilege to be able to photograph the leaders, and also this major leadership transition between the Hu Jintao and and Wen Jiabao came to the current president Xi Jinping. And this picture was taken during a flower ceremony, and at the monument of the People's Heroes, to mark National Day on Tiananmen Square in Beijing, 2012, basically. And it was before, this was before the Chinese Communist Party was going to plan a 5-yearly Congress in November to approve its first leadership changes for a decade. So this was, to me, kind of a historical moment, because then this is when you will see the old leaders and the new one together, and to me that picture speaks a lot. So the country was basically developing at an incredible speed. There were major economic and technological advances, and it was just really interesting for me to be able to document this and see how it has basically transformed from what you would see more as because China is so diverse, and there were many different changes in the country. And so from areas of really backward areas, and to the major skyscrapers and cities in Beijing and in Shanghai. So that was an interesting development, especially with the technological changes. You can see that lots of major technology companies like Alibaba, WeChat, Tencent, they're all coming out, and they have been doing all this this even before the rest of the world caught up, like for example WeChat Pay and Alipay, all these things, it was very common in Beijing, in China, way before it was common in other countries, and way before any other, even Apple Pay or Samsung Pay caught up. So this was interesting to me, and uh, I felt that this was something I just wanted to share with you guys. So one notable story of this development was this self-taught farmer turned inventor, Tao Xiang Li. So this is a picture of him with his self-made robot. He was called the King of Innovation in his home in Beijing, and you can see that this is this robot is huge. It can't even be taken out of his home because the doorway was too small for his tiny Beijing futon. So this was mainly made up of scrap materials. This robot was built in about a year, with a cost of production and expenses amounting to about 300,000 yuan, which is about 37 euros. And well, it took up, as I said, it took up quite a huge space in the back alley of Beijing in his home. So just a little bit about Tao. He has this fierce passion for inventing, and taught himself to take apart various machinery and put them back together. He came to Beijing at the age of 16, taking on odd jobs before making headlines in 2008 with his homemade submarine, and which he eventually sold to an artist for 100,000 yuan. And so he hopes to attract investors to invest in his inventions, and he actually holds several patents but he just have the lack of funds to bring them to fruition. And it was just an amazing experience to meet him and to talk to him and to see his stories. Not only because we share the same surname, we have the same Chinese Tao surname, but just because that he was such an interesting phenomenon. That he came from nothing, that he was just a rural farmer, and then he taught himself how to make a human this robot that could that was just incredible. And this picture was taken in his home, in his futon, and it was just a portrait of kind of like a moment when they shared with his robot. And it was this picture also received the Picture of the Year International Award of Excellence in the Science and History category. So, moving on, as the regional chief for China, I also cover North Korea, and I was very privileged to be able to travel to Pyongyang a few times to cover major events in the so-called reclusive hermit kingdom, which is general out of bounds to foreign journalists. So, so it was incredibly lucky for us to be able to go. In this picture, this is taken during the Day of the Sun Festival on Kim Il Sung Square of basically North Korean soldiers marching during the parade. And this is on the 105th birthday anniversary of former Supreme Leader Kim Il Sung. And so it's not just a parade, of course. I was able to cover some of the street scenes, how the development at that time. Now, of course, that was this is the Kim Jong Un reign. So and we were of course, it's not that we could move around easily in North Korea. We were basically only allowed to go to certain places. We only basically we were monitored by our minders, but still it was an eye-opening to be able to view the lives of these North Koreans and how it is for them. Although I must say that it is also quite difficult, because a lot of these street scenes we could only shoot also from the buses that we were on, that they would ferry us to one place or another. But we are basically not allowed to go out on our own. We are always being followed by minders and being told what we can or cannot photograph. So I must, of course, tell you this is how some of the photos are taken. And of course, what they want to showcase is the might of the country. So these are taken during also the 70th anniversary of the founding in North Korea in 2018 of the soldiers. and also of a mass dance celebrating the day of the Sun Festival. And below you can see the Arirang Mass Game celebrating the National Day and 70th anniversary, and also torchlight parade during that time. So these are some of the things that they wanted to showcase to us, and I felt that it was quite amazing to be able to document as well. So this is just to share with you some of the stories and things I've documented over the years. But at the end of 2019, almost a decade away from home, from Singapore, I was ready to come home. However, this was just at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, which would change the world and, of course, the Singapore I knew. So Singapore entered the circuit breaker period on 07 April up till the 1st of June in 2020 in order to prevent the escalating COVID-19 infections. So during this time, Singaporeans were advised to stay home as much as possible, and non-essential work places were shut down. All gatherings with family or friends who do not live together were banned, and gatherings at public spaces were also forbidden. So everything was closed, and schools were closed, and students had transit to home-based learning, and restaurants, and basically everything was closed. So it was during this time that we were asked by the National Museum to collaborate on the Picturing the Pandemic series exhibition, and to document Singapore during this historic moment, these difficult times. And this was also something that I was really grateful to be able to be part of, because it gives me a chance to rediscover Singapore again, to look at my home like it was never before, and to be able to do this as part of a project was I was very was very intimate to me. So many of Singapore's iconic places, shopping malls, hawker centers, residential areas, parks, and beaches were emptied and devoid of people, and this just resulted in a very surreal transformation of the spaces. So I went out to all these various different iconic places that I used to know, and to document how it is now that it is devoid of people. Basically, in most of these pictures, you can see that they're empty, and that there's basically only one or two people about. This was kind of this very surreal to me, because I mean, of course, during my years overseas, I do come back and I do see Singapore now and again, but it was always bustling. It was always, Singapore was a fast-paced environment, and there was always a lot of people around. But to come back here and to see this transformation, it was just a new experience, and this also became like this was a new reality for the city-state at that time, and so it was incredible to me to be able to do that too. I mean, it's not just iconic places like the Merlion. It was also in shopping malls, in hawker centers, in beaches, in shopping malls. So I'm sure you guys would know some of these places as well. The first one was in a hawker center in Chinatown, and then in a shopping mall where it was just devoid of people in Punggol, and the playgrounds and in the beaches at the beach was East Coast Beach was basically cordoned off, so there were no happy people. Children were not able to play. This was just a completely different and very surreal environment, and new changes for me. And so it's just kind of like a foreboding emptiness and this quiet everywhere I go. And I hope, and this was how I see and document this project. And although I was rediscovering Singapore, but was rediscovering it in a Singapore that is very different. And so another project we collaborated with the National Museum was of the Singapore General Hospital, and of course this is something that I really wanted to do as well, and I was very thankful for the museum for connecting us. And basically this is about the frontline workers in SGH, which is the largest and first hospital in Singapore to be at the forefront of the COVID-19 fight, which has the first confirmed case in Singapore as well. The first patient was actually a 66-year-old male tourist from China who went to SGH emergency department with fever and cough on 22nd January 2020. So, well, because of this, I mean, the staff were working with long hours, pulling 12-hour shifts and days without a break to ensure work processes and precautionary measures to minimize the risk of infections were in place. And I mean, I set out to document this these frontline workers as well. And it's not just these frontline workers, it's also the back-end workers that contributed to this fight against the pandemic. And they were working around the clock. There were doctors, nurses, radiographers, therapies, lab technologies, volunteers, and they all came in to help to fight against this pandemic. And you can see that this is the emergency room in SGH, and not just the doctors and nurses, and even in the second picture on the top, the where the nurse was the lady was swabbing the patient. She was actually a speech therapist who was also roped in to help out. So everyone was basically pulling their weight, and everyone was basically, helping out and making, contributing to the fight against it. And I just want to say a big thanks to all our frontline workers and to all our back-end workers as well, and healthcare workers who, in SGH and in many various other healthcare facilities who had to work around the clock to fight this. So moving on, another story that I did with for this project, and which was also very, which speaks a lot to me as well, was the transit point at Margaret Drive story. This is basically a home for people who were made rented homeless during the circuit breaker times. Hundreds of people were basically rendered homeless and taken in by shelters across the island when the circuit breaker measures came in. So a lot of non-essential workplaces were shut down, and so people also lost their jobs. This is especially so for a lot of Malaysian workers in Singapore as well, and also other countries, because they were not able to return home. Basically, people who were living in Johor were suddenly made homeless when the Singapore shut down its borders, and they couldn't travel across to back to their homes. And that's when there were a lot of rough sleepers, people who were made rendered homeless during this time. So Transit Point at Margaret Drive is one of those that provided safe accommodation for rough sleepers, including these stranded Malaysians, Singaporeans, and permanent residents who were affected by the pandemic. It was converted from the old Queenstown Polyclinic, which is the shelter operated by New Hope Community Services. And it expedited its opening basically when Malaysia's movement order control came in on 18 March 2020. So many of these individuals who were working in Singapore but with no homes, but homes in Malaysia, and were stranded in the city state, also went to Transit Point. But of course, there were also stories about other residents who were there as well, not just from Malaysia, but from also other circumstances, and also Singaporeans who was just in a bad place at that time. And thankfully, I was able to have a look and be able to come into their lives for that short moment in time, to be able to tell their stories at that time. Although I can say that a lot of them do not want to be photographed, and a lot of them do not want to be shown in these pictures. But then there are some of them who are who are more open and who are willing to share their stories, and I'm really very grateful for them to do that. One of them was this resident, Uncle Lim, Lim Shu Kyung, as for his real name. This is where he sits in his bed, in his new room in Transit Point at Margaret Drive. He's 57, and he used to sleep rough in Sentosa while working part time, selling drinks at the kiosk. But he lost his job in March due to COVID-19, as most places had closed down. So he learned about the shelter at in March, and he came from a friend, and he came to this place, which provided him with safe accommodation, and in return he helps out with cleaning and odd jobs around the shelter. I think it was very amazing. Good that he was able to share his story, and that he was willing to share his stories, because at some point when I was talking to him, he became rather emotional, because in his life this is a very difficult time for him. And actually he was very and he wanted to share his story because he wanted to tell people how grateful he was to just to have this place in Transit Point at Margaret Drive, to be able to have a roof over his head, and to be able to help and contribute as well. So this is more pictures of the residents in Transit Point and Margaret Drive. On the top left, there's resident Yusuf bin Kamien, this is his cubicle. Of course, you can see that in the previous picture, Uncle Lim had a bigger room. That's because he was there for a much longer time, and because of his contribution to the to the shelter, they gave him a slightly bigger room. But most of the rooms in the shelter are actually quite small. They are cubicles that are basically half of the room that, I mean, half of the one room flat, I would say. I mean, much smaller than that. Sorry. So these rooms are made into cubicles, and this resident Uncle Yusuf was just sharing his story as well to us. He's a part-time cleaner who could not go back to Johor to his home where his wife and 3 children lived at a time when the movement control was implemented. So he was sleeping rough at void decks of HDB blocks before volunteers brought him to the shelter where he has been staying since. And then the second one was of Rahmat bin Othman. He's 62, and he plays his guitar to pass the time in the common area as well. And also you can see how the shelter tries to make the place as welcoming and as friendly as possible, with decorations, and food was provided there as well for the residents, which were some of them. The food was donated from various charities and from various well wishers as well. So so you can see that although this was homeless, this was a place for the homeless, but it was also the place where the homeless finds home as well, because they are able to feel like they have a place to go to. And this is another picture of residents Rahmat bin Othman and his wife Siti. So they were just basically able to enjoy an evening outside in the courtyard of the Transit Point at Margaret Drive. So and they were sharing with me their stories of how they were working as cleaners in the same workplace at Resort World Sentosa, when a colleague became infected with COVID-19, and so they have to stop work. So the couple were basically made homeless, and they had to come to the shelter. So, but of course, the shelter has 2 separate areas for men and women, and Siti was staying in the women's area, and Rahmat was staying in the common area. But they were able to enjoy an evening together. And as Siti said, it was really hard for them to get a job during this time, because but they were just really grateful to be able to have a place, have a roof over their head, and be able to be away from the rain, and be able to have a shower. Basically helps a lot, because it was really difficult for them to stay outside. but now they have a place where they can think and then they can plan for the future as well. So moving on, the next story just to share with you was about para athletes. I always have an interest in para athletes, and well, they as a lot of people are affected by the circuit breaker in April. So we wanted to find out how these athletes are coping at home, and I managed to get in touch with two para athletes, the sisters Joan and Ines Hong, and also a former para shooter Aisha Samad, to see how they cope at home during this period. So Joan and Ines, this below was Ines, and then this in this picture, Ines was basically they were training for at home, and the one jumping was Joan, and the one on the ground were Ines. They were lucky they're sisters because then they can help each other in their training. But they were both initially training for the 10th ASEAN Para Games, which was scheduled to be held in the Philippines. But then the games were postponed they were cancelled basically due to the coronavirus. But they continue to train and to at home, and this is what they have to do basically with a mat, with the exercises that their coaches give to them to keep fit. And they spend about 20 to 40 minutes each day to include cardiovascular workouts, muscle endurance training, and exercises that were tailored for goalball. So Joan also keeps a video diary where she records her exercises during the circuit breaker and shared on a YouTube channel called Lonely Workouts with a fellow teammate to motivate each other. And the next story was about Aisha Samad, who is a national para athlete. Before she retired, just before the circuit breaker measures were announced, despite losing all four limbs to a bacterial infection in 2003, the SEA Games bronze medalist and Asian Para Games finalist, she leads an active life and has traveled to many countries like Germany, Australia, Croatia, South Korea, and Indonesia over the years for competitions in the past 7 years. And now, retiring, she has to stay home during this circuit breaker period. So you can imagine this is not quite easy for her as well. So she loves to meet up with people and go out despite her disabilities, and but all this could no longer be done. So, but because I had photographed her before in 2014, when I came back for a short period of time to Singapore, I was able to be invited to the home again to document her experience at home, and she very kindly, allowed me to into her life during this time. Well, she basically channeled her energy into cooking new recipes and making desserts at home with the assistance of her Indonesian helper and family. And she also started experimenting with making popiahs, samosas, and various desserts. So basically trying out a new way of life to move on after the circuit breaker and after her career as a para athlete. So, and I was really happy to be able to share her story and to be able to and that this is could be shown at the National Museum as well, because I think, these are just little stories that were of Singaporeans, and it was a way for me to reconnect with Singaporeans and to be able to find my way home as well, and basically get to know Singapore again. And so I just find this, I was very thankful to be able to be part of this project, and very thankful to all these subjects who welcomed me into their life and who allowed me to be part of their life at this short period in time. So thank you very much.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Hwee Young, for the very insightful presentation about your experience living and working overseas. So I think we do have some questions from the public, okay, about your experience.
Okay.
So actually, for me personally, right? So how, besides all what you have documented for the museum,
Mm-hmm.
how else have you reconnected with Singapore for the last 1.5 years since the circuit breaker? In what other ways have you done so?
Well, I was able to go to hawker centers and eat all my favorite foods
Yes.
like mee pok, da, and the char kway teow and all the Singapore foods that I have been missing for the past decade. All that I could do, and that was very. That was just even if it's a small thing, but it was very important to me to feel like I'm a Singaporean again, and of course and meeting all my friends basically. Although it's difficult, we can't really meet because of all these restrictions now. We can't really meet. We can't really. Uh, well, but it was still different because before that there was all this huge distance, but now at least we are in the same environment and we are able to, reconnect again. So I think that was one of the ways that I just reconnected back to with Singapore.
Yeah, I think I think food is really quite important.
Yes, you can say that again.
I
Yeah,
think
that
many
was one of the
Singaporeans feel
things.
that way as well
Exactly.
about the different types of food that we have in Singapore. I think it's really something that many Singaporeans treasure,
Mm-hmm.
and we really love our food. So I
Exactly.
understand what you mean when are able now to finally eat with much convenience all the food in the hawker centers and whatnot. And also, I think what you mentioned, family and friends. Yeah, I agree. I mean that's also something that's important. For people when we live here. Sometimes when you're apart, when you're living overseas, it's really hard
Mm-hmm.
to connect. Although there's so much technology, right? But nothing beats the face
Yes,
to
nothing
face,
beats the face to
the face to
face, and nothing
interaction.
beats
But of course,
just
now with
yeah
the
having the same experiences too. I
correct,
suppose
correct.
yes.
Yeah. So actually we do have a few questions.
Mm-hmm.
So based on the sharing in your when you were living overseas, the pictures that you shared, it seems like is environmentalism and like technology related themes that you are personally interested to document, because
Mm-hmm.
there seems to be a focus on that
Mm-hmm.
when you were in your earlier photos. Yeah. You can share a bit more about that.
Well, it's not just those that I documented because as wire photographers, we are basically documenting everything. We are basically shooting news, political news, economic news, and also fashion, entertainment, basically everything that you see in your newspapers regarding the news in China. It is just that for me, I'm especially drawn to these issues because they are such big topics in China during that time as well, and they affect everyone, basically, not just China. I think they also affect, how the world sees China and I mean, this climate change issues is not just in China, it's everywhere. So to me, those are big topics that I was a bit more interested in. That's why I choose to share with you guys. Yeah,
That's very. I think that's very true. I think like sustainability,
exactly.
environment. I think these are really quite big issues right now. Entire world is facing, not only Singapore. So
Right.
yeah, I can't understand where you're coming from. So if you had the chance, right,
Mm-hmm.
which country's COVID-19 experience would you be interested to document besides Singapore, having gone around, the world? So which other country would you be interested to document?
Well, to be honest, I really would rather not document any COVID-19 um, cases because I really wished for it to stop and that this never happened because I think a lot of lives were changed, a lot of lives were destroyed as well during this time. And to be honest, I think this is a very bad situation for a lot of people. Being back in Singapore and being able to document what happened in Singapore was actually important to me, and that was why I did it. But if I have a choice, I think I wouldn't want to document this in any country, in anywhere.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I mean, no one wants the virus to be around. I mean, but unfortunately, it is. So we
Right.
just have to deal with it, lah, I
Yes.
guess.
But just to answer your question, and if you want me to choose really a specific place, I would say China again because I just left China when before this thing became like a full blown pandemic. So actually to me I was like, oh, that's a big story, and that was I just kind of like got out of it, and then I think okay, if that's a story that I really wanted to document, and I should have, then that would be China.
Okay,
Yep.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have you have quite a long-term relationship with China since
Yes.
from your earlier days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, not less because I mean, it is the land of my ancestors. I mean, we are
mm,
all ethnic Chinese, so I always want to feel like I'm going back to my roots again
mm,
and to rediscover what my ancestors were. Although I mean, as a Singaporean, I mean, this is we are kind of different, but we're the same. So it's interesting to me.
understand.
Yeah.
Anyway, just to share with our viewers also, the reason why the museum also embarked on this project of documenting the COVID-19 experience in Singapore is also part of the museum's broader initiative to collect contemporary. So this is something that the museum is working towards doing up or curating more contemporary related exhibitions. So I think this COVID-19 experience is just something that the museum is just starting off doing. And in the future, in the coming years, I think you can expect to see a bit more of this as well for the public. Actually, if we look around the world, other museums are also doing this, collecting contemporary and collecting the COVID-19 experience, so that we can document it and to share it with future generations down the line on how maybe we can possibly even prevent it, or yeah, or how people cope with it, during these terrible times.
Right.
I just share that a bit more with our viewers. So so maybe you can move a bit more to your role as a photographer, right? So
Mm-hmm.
maybe could you share a bit more about your experience being a female photographer? Or how has the photography scene changed when you first started as a photojournalist? Since you've been doing this for quite some time.
Sure. Well, I think the main changes is that there are a lot more female photographers now compared to 20 years ago. I think when I first started out, there were just a few people, but I mean now there is more, but still there is also just a very small number too. I think physically there are some challenges to being a female being a photojournalist, and because not just because that we have to be out there and be in the elements and be and we also have to carry a lot of heavy equipment and be able to navigate a lot of challenges along the way in a very male dominated industry. And well, yeah, a lot of times people look at you, they don't believe that I'm a photographer. They don't believe because there was this view of the photojournalist as this white male who is out there, documenting the world, but traveling the world and everything. But when you see a tiny Asian lady, they don't really expect you to believe that. But I think there are some pros to that as well, because then I mean in my work I prefer to kind of stay in the shadows, kind of just be observing, just kind of not have people know that I'm in the room, and that was much easier being a female and being a tiny person. Basically, I mean, even now on this rostrum, I need something to stand on. So it's interesting. So yeah, for me, is there are pros to being a female photographer in this industry, even for so long. Yeah.
Hmm. So in your entire career, maybe is there any interesting stories that you have about being that you've documented before? Yeah. Uh, yeah.
Well, some of these stories I have shared already, but I think maybe you're asking me about my experience as a photographer. Um, well, I think one of the interesting stories for me, I think most recent recollection would be the Tokyo Olympics that I just came back from, and that was a completely different Olympics, I guess, because I have covered two other summer Olympics and also two other Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang and Sochi. So the Tokyo Olympics basically was just a completely different experience, and with no spectators and a lot of these COVID-19 measures, social distancing measures. We have to take PCR tests every day, and also with all these changes in how the Olympics is being covered with so that was really interesting to me, and it was also I also was able to see how Japan basically was dealt with this crisis. Although I wouldn't say it was very well, but I think they were still very successful in hosting the the Olympics. And I guess this experience was very interesting to me in that that this is just a completely also very surreal Olympics so far.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think we don't get to see the, I guess, the photographer's perspective of being there and documenting. I think maybe most of us, we've just seen the athletes,
Right,
just doing their best, but from the photographer's side. Yeah, so
right.
thanks for sharing that.
No
I
problem.
guess it was quite challenging as well for everyone who was there, athletes and photojournalists. I mean, but I think in the end, it was done. Yeah,
Yes, and I
the
think kudos to Tokyo and also all the thousands of volunteers and
yep.
the organizers for doing for hosting this. I mean, I think it was a tremendous challenge basically because of all the restrictions that they have to hold, and I mean, and also for how this pandemic has affected everyone. There's a lot of fear as well, but then but a lot of things that you don't really see because you only see what's being on TV, but then behind the scenes a lot of things has to be done so that this games could go through successfully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Mhm.
So maybe now we move on towards your project that we did
Mhm.
during the pandemic. So when during last year's circuit breaker, when you were out documenting, right, what was the biggest challenge that you faced when taking these photos
uh,
for the during the pandemic?
do you mean in the
It's
spaces
yeah, correct.
in the open spaces?
Yeah, or maybe
uh
in the whichever space, yeah, spaces that you went to.
Well, I think the main challenge was to was finding the angle or the iconic view that everyone was kind of familiar with, but then you want to shoot it in such a way that people understand it, but can also see how different it is now. Of course, that depends on the timings as well. That you have to choose a time when the light and the and is good, and that that's the place is what it is. So I think that was the main challenge in the spaces. I mean, it was because there was nobody. So I guess in a sense it was slightly easier in that you don't have to because sometimes when you go out and you shoot, and there are people who are objected to being shot, to being photographed, but then in this case there's nobody. So I was in a sense able to move around. I think one of the only problem was if we have to show that we have a permit from to be out there, because sometimes there's security and stuff like that would stop us. But because I'm an accredited journalist here, so that wasn't really a problem. So yeah, that was one of the challenges basically.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
But then, of course, if you talk about other challenges during this project, then I think the main challenge was having the trust of people to be allowed into their homes. Like, for example, with the para athletes and with, I mean, with Aisha, it's okay because we are friends, but with with the para athletes and with also other situations like even SGH and transit, I think that was a bit more difficult because I mean this is obviously pandemic times, and they are also worried about infections from strangers outside.
yeah.
So but I think working with the National Museum was a big plus because I mean then they know that this is for the National Museum and it's a project that they can get on board with and they can trust
Mm.
MMS. Yeah.
Yeah. So, as was there any moment, especially maybe during the shoots, was there any moment when you felt afraid because of the virus when you're out documenting? Because I think last year there's still a lot of unknowns
Mm-hmm.
as to what the virus is and what it can do. So, was there any moment in time when you were feeling a bit anxious or afraid?
Well, I think absolutely. I'm human, so of course I'm worried. I think especially when with the hospitals, with SGH and BVH, so we had to do these testings with the mask. So before we are actually allowed to go to cover the to go into the wards, we have to make these tests with the N95 mask to make sure that they are completely fitting to our face and all that. And so that was kind of like, oh, you get the severity of the situation and how it is that you could get it. But although, of course, later on I would realize that, hey, basically, the hospital is maybe one of the safest places to be in because that's where that's where the doctors and the nurses know how to take care of themselves, and they will make sure that you are taking all the precautions that is necessary for this pandemic and later on this kind of fear sort of subsided. I mean, it was more my parents and my family basically who were more fearful, but then I was able to make them understand that this is something that is necessary, and that this is something that it would be good for the country as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think naturally family members will definitely be concerned if you're out there when everyone else is at home,
Right.
worried that you might catch the virus lah. So, but thankfully everything went smoothly lah.
Yes, thankfully, and to basically to all the healthcare workers and as well who advised me on how to the ways to protect myself and stuff like that. So I think it was in the end, I think everything went
Did you have
fine.
to sanitize your cameras, or did they ask you? Is because you were touching it? It's something that you.
Yes, every time at that time, every time I went back home, I would take the alcohol swabs, and then I would do like a do over on all my equipment and everything that has been basically been outside,
Mm,
just as a precaution. Not that I mean, at the time we were all very worried. Yeah. Now I don't do it all that time, but still, I think it's good to take some precautions like
yeah.
these. Yeah.
So we have one more last question, or maybe second last. So do you have in this whole process of documenting this Singapore's COVID-19 experience, do you have a favorite photograph or a story, that really resonated with you?
During this
Yeah.
COVID-19
Yeah.
with NMS,
Yes.
I think my favorite photograph would definitely be the one of John and Ines in their homes. Basically, the one where she was jumping above her Ines. John was jumping above Ines' head. I mean, to me, that was just a joyful moment amid all this depression, and that kind of just I was happy to be able to be, because they were very sweet, and they were very joyful people as well, and it was just great to be able to photograph them, and I just enjoyed that moment with
Great.
them.
Yeah. I think really the little moments sometimes,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
That moment of happiness that
Yes.
that you can capture. All right. So I think we just have one last question.
Sure.
Is that so do you have what are your future plans in terms of terms of your work? Do you plan to like travel again once restrictions are allowed?
Well, basically now my role is more managing the teams in Asia Pacific, but we do have the Beijing Olympics, Winter Olympics coming up,
Okay.
so that would be something that we'll be looking into in the near horizon. Yeah.
Okay, great. I wish you all the best
Thank you so
for
much.
your future endeavors. So really, once again, we'd like to thank Hwee Young for her presentation today and for sharing with us all her lovely stories and all her lovely images as well, of how her in her career that she has done so far, and also sharing her personal journey, of reconnecting with Singapore during this pandemic. So I would like to thank also all the viewers for submitting your questions on Pigeonhole. So we've tried our best to answer as many of them during the Q&A session. So if you'd like to be kept up to date with our latest museum programs, so you'd like to find out more about other types of programs that the museum is doing, do follow us on our National Museum of Singapore Facebook page or our Instagram page. And also, it's also possible if you could also fill in our survey form. There's the link over there, or you can scan the QR code, and you can also let us know what you think of today's program. Lastly, do visit our museum and check out our special exhibition, Picturing the Pandemic. Okay, it's located in the basement, and it'll run all the way till 17th of October 2021. So thank you once again, everyone, for tuning in, and thanks again to Hwee Young for being here today with us at the museum. And yep, stay safe, everyone. Take care. Bye.